I've been really passionate about this whole
Mm,
job part-time space because I think it can be a game changer for women. I see some friends who, are struggling or have dropped out of the workforce after having kids because, full-time roles can be incredibly taxing. And so job share or a part-time role is a game changer for women to be able to progress their careers forward while being able to balance life. So I think the reason why in Asia we're still behind is it's more of a cultural thing where
mm.
there's a lack of trust.
Hello and welcome to Make It Work, the bi weekly podcast where we uncover inspiring stories of modern working mamas in Asia who have redefined their career paths whilst putting family first.
Hello and welcome to another episode with Make It Work. Today I have a really special guest, Khatija Aslam. And it's not really visible in this video here, but Khatija is actually 9 months pregnant with baby number 3. So thank you so much for joining. Khatija is Pakistani by ethnicity. She was born and raised in Malaysia, and she's called Singapore home for 18 over years now. She's been in the corporate life for more than a decade, working in large MNCs from the likes of Unilever, Knorr, Walls, Lifebuoy, and most recently, a really interesting role as Global Innovation Marketing Lead at Zespri. And what's so cool about it is that it's a job share role. Many of us haven't heard of what it is before, but for us who are thinking about part-time or fractional, this is a really interesting concept, and I will share more about it. A little bit more about her. So she's been inspired by her own experience and the stories of career-driven women to start something called Moxy. And this was what really caught my eye. Basically, Moxy is a platform that sparks important and crucial conversations about making behavior change and building inclusive workplaces, which includes building workplaces that are friendly to moms, working moms like ourselves. They've worked with different organizations, Lean In, Club, LinkedIn. There's so much more work to be done, and I'm sure she'll be able to share a lot of interesting, exciting insight. Khatija is a mom of 2 and 3 very soon, and she is going to have 3 daughters. And with that, her mission is to really create a world where more women thrive and have equal opportunities to pursue all their different roles that they play in life. So with that, welcome, Khatija.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. And thank you, Sarah, for this great opportunity and for already introducing me so well. I'm not sure what else to add, but yeah, so I'm a mom to 2 girls. I have a 6-year-old who's starting primary school next year and a 4.5-year-old. And I have a third girl on the way who's coming in 2 weeks. And let's hope everything goes well. So I currently work in a job share role with Zespri, and I'm the founder of Moxy, a platform that's focused on building inclusive workplaces. Prior to that, I've spent time in the FMCG world as a global category manager and a brand manager across different brands. So it was a really fun time. My husband works in the commodity sector. Yeah. So a fun fact about me is that I have been a background dancer in a Bollywood movie before when I was really young. So I did not look the way I do now. So you might not be able to recognize me because I think I was like 16 years old. But yeah, I just thought I'd share that as a fun fact.
Interesting. Yeah. Well, I guess that shows that you're never afraid to be in front of the camera.
Yeah. Yeah. You could say so. Yeah.
So let's talk about this change that you went through after becoming a mom, and we'd love to hear how it impacted you in especially your approach to work.
Yeah, no, definitely. I started off my career as a management trainee and, I thought this was going to be the company that I'll be in the long run. And obviously from a corporate perspective, things change all the time. Restructurings happen, relocations happen. So I've tried to embrace that as and when it came along. But I think, becoming a parent was such a huge wake up call. And I had no idea that this was how life was going to change. No one really talks about it. I grew up with a stay-at-home mom, and she was very much into our school life and our home life as well. And I mean, I think it's a great, huge sacrifice for stay-at-home moms to be able to do that. And my sister, who's 6 years older than me, carried on with work when she had her 2 children. And I don't know if it was a function of me not paying that much attention because I had not had my kids at that time, but we didn't really talk that much about the struggles of balancing and juggling it all until I had my
Mm,
first one. So I think it maybe you become more aware of it when you have kids yourself. Maybe
yeah.
there is something happening in the background, you don't realize it until you become a parent yourself. That's when you're like, oh yeah, okay, this is how it's affected me. I think pre-kids, I felt a lot freer in terms of decision making. If there's an overseas assignment, you just say, yeah, sure, I'll do it, Obviously, that changes. Post having kids, you become mindful of your priorities, what trade-offs you're making when you're deciding on roles. So it does play a role. So I would say that's kind of how it's changed for me.
Yeah, I recently been reflecting about this whole idea of change. And I think one of the things that I didn't realize was that it would change me beyond just change my life and my
Yep.
lifestyle and my routine. It's something that I didn't just somehow didn't cross my mind that I personally would change with in terms of values, priorities, and how I wanted to spend my time. Because now it was beyond just me. And I realized it's also like a second chance of being a better human
Yeah.
when having kids around. Yeah, like I'm relearning my own like family of origin stuff and learning about why I think certain ways and why I, have inclinations to say like, focus on academics, and it makes
Yeah.
me think more. And yeah, so it's so interesting that it's not something that I had anticipated, but
Yeah.
only when you go through it, you realize like, oh yeah, there are all these things and parts of you that come to the fore. And yeah, so
Yeah.
really resonate with that as
It's
well.
really a chance to like recreate yourself in a way, right? And I've seen so many people then trying to look for that sense of purpose, because then you start questioning that if you're putting your time and heart into something, you want to do it if it has a sense of purpose. It should be worth the trade-off of,
Yeah.
taking time away from the kids. So yeah, I think that changes as well. You're almost
So
rewriting your
actually, yeah, I would love to double click a little bit on that as you talked and you touched on the piece of believing that the first job was going to be your forever job. How did that change how you thought about your work, and like what kind of changes do you make?
I think the two big levers of change were, the first thing was they were restructuring the entire foods division at Unilever at that time, and the team was being relocated to Bangkok. So obviously, a lot of us did not make the move. And so, I had the option of either leaving or switching to a part-time role within another division of the company for like 6 months. So I did take that on because I thought it would be a good opportunity. And it was a part-time role. I had then just had my older one. So it was a good opportunity to be able to do that. I had already started to ask around internally for job sharing roles, but it's still a very new concept in Singapore, right? So only 3% of companies in Singapore do it, but I had read and heard about other colleagues around the world doing it. And I think it was a combination of team relocating and also having my first daughter, where I really started to assess, how do I want to spend my time moving forward? Having my first daughter also wasn't easy. We had two miscarriages before I had her. So I felt like, gosh, these are such precious moments. I don't want to completely get blindsided by my career and just go full time with it, because I kind of knew how that would end up. So I wanted to make it a more balanced approach and see, okay, can I do part-time or job sharing while also being more present at home? And that's kind of what gave rise to the whole part-time job sharing situation, where I started looking at options. Yeah.
Interesting. Okay. And so you've been in such, for like a better word, perhaps like fractional roles since your firstborn?
Well, yeah. So my firstborn, for 6 months, I was in a part-time role. Then I had my number two 15 months later. So that was when I was in between the two roles. So I left Unilever, and then I was approached by Zespri to join. And then I joined full-time actually. So I
Oh,
joined with them as a marketing in my current role, but in full-time capacity. And at that time, Anya, my number two, she was 6 months old, and it was COVID. So I took that on because by then she was 6 months, and I was like, okay, let me just try this out. And my line manager at that time said, see how you go. And if it doesn't work out, we'll talk when we'll discuss more. So I felt like that was a comfortable arrangement for me to
yeah.
try full time again. So that really helped. Yeah.
Great. And I think it's also probably helpful if you could define a little bit what does job sharing look like, at least in your
Yes.
experience.
Well, so job sharing is when two individuals share a full time role. So they both work part time and they split the role into two so that they're able to fulfill the full time capacity. So in some parts of the world, you do 3 days a week each. So you have one day overlap where you meet in between. or you do like half headcount wise, so it's 2.5 days each. So that's kind of how job sharing works. So in my case, it started off with part time, the beginning, and then I went into a full time role. And then when that full time role didn't work out, I took a 1 year sabbatical because it was also really hard to during COVID having a really young kid at home and doing calls virtually. So I took a 1 year sabbatical from there, and then I asked to come back in a job share part time role, essentially. So now what I'm doing is a job share.
Gosh, okay. But in terms of compensation, does it also basically prorate into half the
Yeah.
full time?
Yeah. No, so in a job share, basically everything gets prorated. So if you're working for zero point 0.5 of the headcount, your salary gets cut into half, your leave gets cut into half, but you
Yeah.
do still get your benefits as per normal. So that's kind of how it usually works.
All right. Would love to hear a little bit more on the landscape that you shared earlier on that, in Singapore or in Asia, it's only 3% that have such unique alternate arrangements. Yeah. What is it that you see? Why is it that way? What
Yeah.
is
So
it? Yeah, out there.
I've been really passionate about this
Mm.
whole job sharing and part-time space because I think it can be a game changer for women. I see some friends who, are struggling or have dropped out of the workforce after having kids because, full-time roles can be incredibly taxing. There's a lot of traveling involved. And so job share or a part-time role, I think for me is a game changer for women to be able to progress their careers forward while being able to balance life. So I think the reason why in Asia we're still behind is it's more of a cultural thing where there's a lack of trust in terms of someone being able to fulfill the responsibilities of the role in that half time that they are allocated, or even accountability wise, right? So before building Moxy, I was initially going to start a job sharing platform where you match people together for a potential job share. So I had interviewed a lot of, CHROs and CEOs of companies and startups. And I remember one person literally telling me, "Oh, I need one throat to choke."
I
So
need one
I
one
need
road
throat
trip.
to choke. So I was like, "Oh gosh, okay, that's kind of where it comes from." So accountability, I think, becomes a bit of a gray area when you have two people sharing a role, but I think it's really up to individuals and organizations. And I think that's where we need a bit more education in this space. And then from a company perspective, financially costs does go up because you prorate your salaries and your benefits, your leaves, but your benefits technically then you're paying for two people. And you're providing devices for two people as well, access for two people too. So there is that financial downside, and even from a head count, from a structural perspective, if you do job share in its ideal format, you have two people working 6 headcounts, 3 days a week. And so that becomes a 1.2 headcount. So a lot of HRs are not keen to implement that internally. And so you might end up with like a point five headcount to make it a one. So I think it's a lot of back and forth conversations for job share. But ultimately, I think, if you don't ask, it won't happen. Right. So I always encourage people, and I've had so many women come up to me to be like, "How did you crack this? Like, how did you get this role?" And I think it really comes down to firstly build your credibility within the organization, show that you can do your work and they can hold you accountable. And then the second part is ask. Don't be afraid or be hesitant to ask because they won't know otherwise what you're looking for. So yeah, those would be my two main bits of advice.
I think this is definitely something that folks are very curious about. And yeah, we'll add, resources, links to Moxy, some readings, or even information that will be helpful for our
Yeah.
listeners to get a handle of it and perhaps even bring to their HR if they're thinking about
Yeah,
asking.
yeah, there are definitely a lot of resources. I mean, even in the government portals, there's grants available for companies because Singapore is trying to drive job sharing. So there are grants available for companies to be able to implement it. There's guidelines in place as well. So I'm happy to share links if it helps.
Yes, definitely. That'll be great. Before we go to talk a little bit more about Moxy and the work that you all do, I also want to hear a little bit more from the personal side where you and your husband, how do you all work to, talk about you taking on a different kind of role at work and also starting something new. Like I'm sure y'all had conversations about, how you'll be able to handle all this.
Yeah. Yeah, no, definitely. I think, I'm blessed to have a partner who is very supportive and who understands that, this is a space that I'm very passionate about. So that whole journey of seeing having two kids and then having a third one on the way, I think it's so easy, right, to get lost and disconnected from each other. And it's definitely been a roller coaster ride for us, like especially in the early years. And I recall at one point, doing that full-time role and managing the admin stuff at home, the invisible load at home, and just hitting rock bottom and thinking, gosh, when is this going to end? It just wouldn't stop. And it felt like I was the only one doing it all. And it took a very objective conversation, literally with a pen and paper where we sat down to list down all the things I was doing versus all the things that he was doing for us. Whether it's financially, how much we were bringing to the table, whether it was mentally bringing what we were doing for our family, and then recalibrating that so that we both understand the value of what both of us are bringing to that table. So I think in this case, like both spouses need to be empathetic and willing to make it work. Unfortunately, I think in our society, there's still a lot more education required in this space. Like what happens post how a woman's body or mental state, what happens to that after as well, or even for men to be able to take on more of the invisible load at home, if they want to support their spouse's wish to continue working. I think a lot of the education still needs to happen. So I'm hoping that will happen in the coming years. Yeah. With the younger.
Yeah, I think so. And I think if we see more models of, more equitable, like load sharing and husbands, dads being more involved, I mean, that can only help, right? With
Yeah.
showing that it could look different for our younger generations. Would love to hear maybe anything specific that you all changed after that exercise.
Oh, we did. So I think the
Yeah.
most specific one is anything school related. So I realized that there was a lot of like forms to fill out from a preschool perspective, like, oh, going on this field trip and can we have consent for this? And, can you order this for their costumes? And those were all like little things that were kind of piling up. So my husband's very passionate about education. So I was like, okay, that's one thing we can recalibrate where you can take on that piece of work. So since then, he's in charge of anything education related.
Oh, wow. That's
Yeah.
interesting. Yeah. So, Minister of Education.
Minister of Education, that's right. You tap onto their strengths.
Good tip. Good
Yep,
tip.
yep, yep.
All right. So I would love to segue now to hear a little bit more about Moxy and yeah, what made you decide to start it? What have you seen since the almost 2 years now of running it?
Yeah. So I think for me, Moxie has always been about creating a space that empowers women's voices and drives, systemic and structural change in workplaces. I mean, I saw it firsthand myself how much of a game changer going part time and doing job sharing was in terms of, wanting to fulfill my ambitions, from a career perspective and also being more present at home. And I felt like, I had good role models and in sense of line managers or sponsors who helped me that journey. And I think it came from a place of, a certain belief system that they had or a certain openness that they had. So Moxie's ultimate goal has really always been about okay, how do you make sure you drive behavior change so you're able to create that systemic structural change towards building inclusive and equitable workplaces. It started off as a glass door for women in a way for female friendly companies, where you could review your companies across key metrics that matter. Initially, I thought that was a good way to put pressure on organizations to realize actually you're not that female friendly, or here, look at your ratings here. But I quickly realized that while that was great information for women looking for women friendly companies, it would have taken much longer to build up like enough reviews that were compel employers to make a difference or like do things differently. Plus, it wasn't a very collaborative approach, right? Because some employers might feel a bit cornered or they might feel like or they might get really defensive. So I wanted to take on a more collaborative approach. And so that's why we quickly pivoted into partnering directly with employers to diagnose first what's going on internally because we believe like all the other pulse surveys that you have it doesn't tell you what the gaps are across metrics that matter to women. So for example, how do you fare in terms of flexibility? Do you have enough male allies, or do you have enough allies in the organization? Do women feel like they have enough sponsors in the organization? So we really help them diagnose first what's going on. And that's through Moxy Insights, which is our private diagnostic tool. And then we come up with behavior change solutions. So, I mean, insights is a big part of, my background as well. But innovation as well is something I feel passionate about. So, we then work with gaming partners and design behavior change solutions. And one of them is, for example, called Moxy Table Talk. It's a card game. It's a collaborative storytelling card game that builds awareness, empathy, and action around unconscious biases at work. So by bringing in more innovative products and solutions, we believe that, we would be able to have those difficult conversations in a more constructive way and drive behavior change and mindset change in order to become more inclusive and equitable. So that's kind of what Moxy hopes to do. And so far, it's been a great journey. Like we've worked with organizations like Prudential, Goldman Sachs, Klook, and we have some exciting work happening next year as well, where we're looking to bring our games virtual. So we're able to scale it too. And yeah, so exciting things coming ahead.
That's amazing. Wow. Yeah. Good job on pushing through with this area where I think it's really important, but
Yeah.
there's not just a lot of, I guess, money in it, right? It's
Yes.
HR. It takes folks who are really passionate and truly believe in making change to do that. And kudos to you because you are walking and breathing the talk. You talked a little bit about this game table talk. Can you talk a little bit about how is it played, and is it like with different seniorities in the organization? That I'm sure there's a lot of thought about the
Yeah.
sensitivities if you play
Yeah.
with your boss.
Yeah, yeah. So I think the good thing is that because it's a game, it takes all the pressure off, right? Like it's just it's a safer, fun space to be in. So it's a collaborative storytelling game that's built around the experiences of women in the workplace. So you literally have like character cards, different characters that each table would get. So you can play between like 40 to 100 people, 7 people in each table, and each table gets a certain character card. And so you have to play out the story of this character through negative or positive experience cards that you get. And so you build up the story of the character, of how life is like in her workplace as a team. And then hidden in the decks is our voice cards where you can negate a negative event. So you can essentially, as an ally or a bystander or a manager, use your voice card to negate a negative event and score more points for your team. And then we really, through those voice cards, try to educate people on, okay, what should you say if you experience something? For example, your character could have a card down that says she was told to smile more in conversations with clients moving forward or in her performance review. And the voice card could be, to ask for more constructive feedback that's not dependent on style, but it's based more on your actual performance. So it really, tries to educate people on, okay, how do you ask those questions back? Or for example, if you have a character that has been turned down for a promotion because management thinks they might be having a baby soon, but your voice
Mm,
can be, as a person in the room, you could ask, why do you think so? Like asking very important questions in a difficult conversation or in a difficult situation to be able to just kind of break down barriers and make sure it doesn't happen in real life. So that's
amazing.
how
Yeah.
it works. And we've played it with in different ways. We've played it in the context of building allyship in the workplace where we had a client wanting to build more male allies. We've also played it in the context of building more, better mental wellness and mental health in the workplace as well. So there are different ways to go about it. We've played it with younger professionals too, in terms of equipping them with how do you react to certain situations, if they come about. So there's a lot of different legs to it.
Very interesting. Yeah. I've never played a game before in a corporate setting, at least relating to
Oh,
work. So what are some like early feedback that you've had about it?
so, I mean, we've gotten feedback that, because it's a gamified setting, it has helped people have difficult conversations, talking about taking time off work or talking about taking maternity leave, how do you navigate those situations? So a lot of women have come back to us and said, this educated me and made me feel more comfortable or even gave me ideas of how to
Mm.
create that feedback or how to ask those questions. For men, we've gotten feedback that there have been a lot of aha moments about, gosh, either they didn't realize women go through these experiences in the workplace, or they didn't realize that, certain comments that they make could impact a woman in that way in the workplace. And that's typically what you would call like microaggressions, right? Where you wouldn't even realize if you called someone a sweetheart. In certain cultures, it's totally fine, but in other cultures, it's taken, some women may not be okay with it. So just to make them more aware of it. So those are typically what we see are aha moments.
Wow. Is Moxy just in Singapore right now?
So at the moment, yes, but because Moxie Table Talk is going to turn virtual in the coming months, so we are looking to expand globally as well.
Exciting. Yeah. I'm sure there's quite a lot of thought that we have to go into about how might play out in different countries, different cultures.
Yes, yes, yes. I'm excited to see how that plays out. And it's interesting because like no one game has ever been the same. It's always been a different story because people relate to it and then they build on their own experiences to those stories as well. So you get to see a lot of the cultural nuances as well that pop up.
Yeah. What is one thing that's come up, at least for our local Singaporean workplaces?
I would say there's been quite a few, but I would say the one that has made me feel like, oh gosh, this is definitely a very Asian Singaporean thing is when one of the players was playing the card and it said, oh, my manager gave me feedback that I should smile more often. And another person played their voice card and said they will use their voice and say, okay, I will try to be better next time. And then luckily, two other people in that table were like, oh no, but that's not okay. Like, you should actually go back and say, can you give me more constructive feedback? And I thought about it and I realized that actually a couple of years ago, maybe I would have said the same thing, and I think a lot of us would because, we're taught to not be confrontational, right? Or even if we're given feedback to just be like, okay, noted and not
Mhm.
anything back because you also don't want to sound confrontational if you say anything back. You don't really know what do you even say to that? So that I thought was like definitely a very, yeah, Asian insight.
Very interesting. Yeah, I can resonate with that where you don't know whether you can ask for more behind
Yeah.
that statement. But I think framing is so important, like what you said, of how we can push forward with such conversations by trying to frame it beyond like, you're giving out bad vibes, but it's more like, okay, what does it mean? Or like, are there specific areas that are areas I need to improve on in terms of maybe, presence or something like that?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, and I understand, like, if you're in a client-facing role, like, you have to have a certain demeanor or you have to have, a certain personality in that role. But I think it's exactly like you said, it's the framing of it. Like, for those who are giving feedback, start off with being more constructive. And there is so much data that shows that women are given less constructive feedback than men. We're given more feedback on our style and our appearance. So how do we ask for that feedback and how do we give, more constructive feedback based on performance first? And by the way, I think this will help you, in terms of growing in your role or in terms of doing better in your role is to be more mindful of your facial expressions, you know? So
Mm,
yeah, I think it's also how the feedback is delivered.
I love that. I love that. I want to put you a little bit in a spot, Khadija. So, if there was a real life situation, right, where somebody who is perhaps going to be pregnant, whether it's the first time or the third time, yeah, how would you advise this person to have a conversation with their manager? This woman is, concerned about whether the promotion is at stake, whether her role is still going to be there. What are some tips that you can give?
Yeah, so I mean, that's funny because literally 3 weeks ago, I heard from a friend about how she was holding off on telling or on announcing her pregnancy. And she was like 5 months pregnant. And I'm like, I don't know how you're doing this, because there was a restructure going on in the organization. She didn't want to lose out. Because even though she's been in there for a long time, and she has a really good relationship with her bosses, but that fear was still there. And so my response to that would always be if you are working in the right organization, you should not even be afraid to say it. And I think it comes down to the relationship that you have with your line manager. If it's someone that, is someone who is open, who you think won't judge you for it or won't put you in a box for it, I would have the conversation Obviously, you would wait for the 3-month mark, but I would have the conversation in at least your fourth month to, give them the heads up that this is happening. But you're very much still committed to the role. You still want to grow your career in that organization, and then quickly move on from it and not dwell so much on it as something big that is happening in your life. So, and surprising and interestingly, that friend did have that conversation and they were so happy for her when she told them, and it didn't impact any of the promotions or the new role that she was going to get. But I do recognize that not everyone works in that kind of an organization, right? Some people might still feel a bit,
Mhm. Yeah.
sidelined or sidetracked. But then I think the question would be, do you even then want to continue
Mm.
working in an organization like that? Because guess what? Once you have those kids, it's just going to get harder. You want to be able to work in a company that does support you, that journey, that does understand when you want to take that childcare leave. Um, or when you need to step out of a meeting, and
Yeah.
so it's really about being aware and cognizant of that. Yeah.
Yeah, I like that. I think it does help put a perspective in a better light where it's a kind of litmus test of whether you see
Really,
yourself long in this kind of environment. And that does kind of bring comfort in seeing this as a way to test out as well, whether this is a place that you want to stay.
totally.
So yeah, thanks for that advice. So on the topic of advice, what are some pieces of advice that you would give to women who are looking for these companies? So no more Glassdoor search. Where do we go? What do we
maybe,
do?
maybe in the future Moxy will bring back its Glassdoor feature. I hope so. It's still in my roadmap for the long run. But I think if you're looking for female friendly companies, I think you just have to do your research really well. You have to talk to people who are working in that company, go through Glassdoor, literally filter down reviews by women and read up more about the culture of the company as well. And don't be afraid to ask questions during the interview. Like how do you support women in the workplace? Like how do you make sure that, there are enough sponsors in the organizations, there's clear paths to promotion and progression, and that's when you'll start seeing, based on their responses, whether they do think about these things. So I would say do your research and don't be afraid to ask questions in your interview process.
Something that I've also heard that every company will have some kind of policy that is family friendly. So it's less about the company, but more about your manager. Is
Yeah.
that something that you, yeah, would agree with?
Yeah, definitely. I think you need your manager's support all the way, and asking the right questions to your manager as well during that interview will be crucial, because ultimately they are the ones who speak up for you in that room, or who support your decision, if you want to go on an extended maternity leave, or if you need that sabbatical. So I think your relationship with your manager plays a key role in the kind of person they are and how open they are. And that's when the research comes in, or even, if you go through LinkedIn and try to dig out a bit more to see who else reports to that manager, and maybe have a conversation with that person to get a sense of what the behavior is like. Because a lot of the times on company websites, you see very surface level information. You don't really know what's going on behind the scenes. So the more insider information you can get, the better.
Got it. Yeah, and the Singapore government is also trying to make it easier for employees to have conversations with their employers about flexi work or 4-day work weeks. So, what are additional things that you would suggest or advise for
Yeah.
people who are thinking about having these conversations?
Yeah. So I think we're still a few probably years away from when employers actively, advertise part-time or job share roles. I think if you are someone who wants to drive that internally, it's very important to build your credibility first, and at least work for like that 1.5 to 2 years to build your credibility and your cloud internally, and build that relationship with your manager where there's trust, and trust to where they can hold you accountable, trust where they know they become more aware about your work ethic before you then go and ask if that's a possible option or not, and have that open conversation that, you're willing to either do reduced hours. So you can, instead of a 40 hour work week, you could do a 32-hour work week, or you could scale down to, a 20-hour work week and propose if you want to do a job share, instead of going to your manager with a problem already, maybe try to think creatively of who else you could job share within, and propose that as a solution so that all they have to do is just execute. Because
Mm.
that tends to be another hindrance, right? Like, oh, okay, if you want a job share, but then now I have to
Fine.
put that role up internally, I have to rock the boat internally to find someone else. So that creates a little bit of dilemma for line managers. So if you have a solution in place, you can put it out there already.
Is
But
that
yeah,
your experience as well?
well, actually, so in my experience, because I think what helps is also Zespri is a New Zealand-based company, and they have done job shares before in a different department. It was the first time job sharing was going to happen in marketing and innovation. Because I had, my manager was very open-minded, is very open-minded. And he had seen, my work style over the last couple of years.
You were full
Very
time. You were
so
working full time with them
wow.
before,
I was
right?
working full time, and then I took that 1 year sabbatical, and they knew it was because, of being able to be there with the kids. And they wanted me to come back, and I was just very clear about I will come, I'm happy to come back, but it has to be part-time. And so my role couldn't be done part-time. And so, it could only be done as a job share. So I did help out in having conversations in terms of how, my manager asked me, so how do you see your role being restructured? So that's another dilemma. So aside from finding a job share partner, how will the role look like if
Mm.
you break it up into two? So I worked on that as well, and I presented a proposal to him on how this is how it's going to look like,
Wow.
and this
Yeah.
is what the working days would look like. And that comes from doing research online. There's plenty of resources to be
Right.
able to look at that. So once he saw that, I think he felt more assured. And I think it depends on your role too, right? Like if it can be split into two, how will stakeholder management work? Will it disrupt the organization too much? So I think if you can check those boxes and reassure them, of how it will work, that helps as well. And then when that got done, we connected with HR, and
Mm.
HR basically put an ad out for my role as a job share. And we got quite a few applicants. So actually my job share partner is also another working mom. So she
Okay.
has a young daughter. And it's great because, we really appreciate the flexibility that it gives us. We both work Mondays to Wednesday half days. We meet on Tuesday to regroup and like just share an update of, what's going on. And yeah, it's been going great so far.
Amazing. All right. Thanks, Khatija. This has been really insightful, really practical. I'm sure it's very interesting and so many tips. And of course, we're going to have some resources and links in our show notes to, give some handles to us
Yeah.
who are really new to this and want to explore it a bit more. Last but not least, last question to you. What is one thing you want our listeners to take away from your story today?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think I always say this and think about
Mm.
where you want to be 10 years from now and
Mm.
how you want to look back at this time. You don't want to live with any what ifs or, oh gosh, I wish I had spent more time with the kids, because that's what I hear the most. Like, oh, they grow up so fast. So think about where you want to be 10 years from now and how you want to look back at this time, and then work backwards and then
Mm.
figure out a way to make it happen and take action. Ask if you need to talk to as many people as you can about it and really do something about it, because you don't want to have regrets later and you don't want to feel like you didn't try. So that would be the key takeaway I would want listeners to bring back with them.
This is wonderful. Thank you so much, Khatija, for sharing your time and your story, and wishing you all the best with baby number 3.
Thank you. Thank you for having me, Sarah. I really enjoyed our chat.
Thank you for listening to Make It Work, where we uncover inspiring stories of modern working mamas in Asia who have redefined their careers whilst putting family first. Please help others discover the show by leaving a review and rating on wherever you get your podcasts. Don't forget to follow us on Instagram, LinkedIn, YouTube, and TikTok. Meanwhile, here's to you, making it work.